Chapter 121. If you want to support or read some advanced chapters +10, please follow me on patreon.com/jayjayempi. Nate reached into the inner pocket of his jacket, rummaging silently until he pulled out a small, compressed pouch. He placed it on one of the rusted tables in the abandoned factory. Inside, folded with precision, was a stained and worn shirt. Carlyle looked at it, a faint frown forming as he caught the scent embedded in the fabric. "What is this?" he asked, though his tone already hinted that he suspected the answer. "Riley's shirt," Nate replied in a low but firm voice. "The vampire who attacked Forks. Not even Victoria knows where he is now." Carlyle stood still for a moment, processing the words. His gaze hardened ever so slightly. "Edward Said he escaped. Jacob chased after him, but we haven't been able to speak with him since. We need to find him before he does anything else," Nate insisted, his crimson eyes locking on Carlyle's. "That's why I want to ask you, do you know any vampire with a gift for tracking?" Carlyle drew in a slow breath, as if searching for the right way to explain. "Gifts are rare even among vampires," he said at last. "But tracking, that's one of the more common ones. The best tracker in the world is Dimitri, from the Volturi." At the mention of that name, a cold wave of anger surged inside Nate, brief, but sharp, before he buried it deep enough not to show on his face. "Besides him," Carlyle continued, "I only know of one other, but he lives in voluntary exile. He doesn't like to talk to anyone, and I doubt he'd want to help." Nate's gaze sharpened, his tone turning resolute. "Just get him to talk to me. I'll handle convincing him. That's all I need." Carlyle studied him in silence. The tension between them lingered for a few seconds before he finally nodded. "I think I can persuade him, at least to agree to meet you. But he's an old friend, Nate. I don't want you threatening him." Nate held his gaze, his reply short but steady. "You have my word." "Only words." Carlyle nodded, though the concern in his eyes didn't fade. "It'll take me some time to reach him, but if I manage, I'll send him to the Denali house so you can meet." After that, Carlyle stepped over to Alice and gave her a brief hug, lingering just a moment longer than necessary, as if trying to convey a message without words. Then he turned to Nate, giving him a light pat on the shoulder. "Good luck with your self-control. And don't take too long to come back to us." Nate allowed a faint smile, a brief flicker of genuine gratitude. "Thank you, Carlyle." The Cullen leader left without another word, his footsteps echoing faintly in the silent structure. Nate watched calmly as Carlyle vanished into the shadowed forest like a breath of wind. Once Carlyle's steps had faded completely into the distance, Alice reached for Nate's hand with a gentle yet firm gesture. He felt her fingers, cold and delicate, intertwine with his. Outside, night had fully fallen. The sky, clear and dark, let the moon bathe the forest in silver light, stretching long shadows between the trees. Alice met his eyes and, with a calm smile, said, "We've got a long way to go if we want to reach Alaska." Nate lowered his gaze briefly, speaking with quiet sincerity. "I'm sorry, the trip must be boring. Even tedious." She shook her head slightly, squeezing his hand a little tighter and tugging him forward. "Not at all. We have all the time in the world, and I think it's a good chance for us to talk a bit." Nate nodded, and together they started moving through the forest. The damp earth muffled their footsteps, and though darkness wrapped around everything, Nate could see every detail clearly thanks to his sharpened senses. The rough texture of tree bark, the glint of tiny insects crawling in the grass, even the distant blink of some nocturnal animal's eyes. With a faint smile, he glanced at Alice. "Have you always felt like this?" She let out a small, musical laugh. "For me, it's always been like this. What I wonder is what it feels like to be human. I can't remember what it was like when I was one." Nate exhaled slowly, searching for the words. "The difference is huge." Alice tilted her head, curiosity sparking in her eyes. "How different?" Nate looked up at the sky before answering. "It's like, you're completely rested all the time. You never feel tired. It's constant energy, like there's no limit. You don't need to breathe, or blink, and yet you perceive everything. You see it, smell it, hear it all. You feel strong, like nothing could stop you. I never imagined this is what it would be like to be a vampire. It's like we're perfect." Alice smiled, a flicker of relief in her eyes. "I'm glad you don't feel bad about what you are now." Nate held her gaze for a moment, as if weighing each word. "I never minded the idea of being this. I just wanted to wait longer. I would have liked to do a few things as a human before the time came. Be with my grandmother in her last years, spend more time with the guys in Forks, maybe go to college with them." Alice watched him in silence. Her usually bright eyes now carried a shade of sadness she didn't try to hide. You haven't said anything, but I'm afraid. Afraid that deep down, you think what happened to your grandmother was because you got involved with me. Nate stopped instantly, surprised. The stillness of the forest seemed to grow heavier, as if everything around them had gone quiet to hear his answer. Why would you think that? Alice lowered her gaze, fidgeting with the fabric of her sleeve as if she needed something to hold on to. Because I think it's my fault. If I hadn't brought you to my house that day, none of what happened with James's coven would have happened. Things would have been different. I was excited, back then, I already felt something for you and wanted you to be part of it all. Now I think that if I'd taken things more slowly, maybe you wouldn't have suffered so much. Nate studied her face, seeing the blend of pain and guilt there. He stepped closer, gently cupping her face in his hands and lifting her chin. I don't blame you for a single thing. I'll be honest, ever since I woke up as a vampire, it's been hard to control my anger. I'm angry, very, at Riley, at the Volturi, even at Edward and Jacob. But never at you. You're the last good thing I have left. Alice closed her eyes, placing her hand over his, seeking the contact as if to anchor her own calm. She stayed that way for a few seconds, letting herself sink into the warmth of the moment before answering softly. I don't think Edward or Jacob are to blame, they did what they could. I don't think it's my place to intervene, I just hope you remember Edward as my brother, and Jacob as your friend. Nate's expression grew serious. I'm not sure, but I think it's something I need to settle with them, when things are calmer, when it doesn't hurt as much. Alice's expression turned slightly uneasy. The things we feel as vampires are harder to manage. We're frozen in time, but I'm sure that eventually you'll find the peace you deserve. And I'll be there with you every step of the way. Nate smiled softly. Right now, I feel at peace, your presence always calms me, and now I can sense you even better than before. Alice gave a playful smile. Oh, and, Nate smiled with confidence, answering in a teasing tone. Seems I wasn't wrong, you're stunning. Alice pulled her hands away, feigning discomfort. Wow, that's pretty intense, Nate. He smiled, catching the joke instantly, lowering his head with mock embarrassment. Don't be like that, you know feelings are different for vampires. Alice widened her eyes in amused embarrassment, remembering when she had told him that herself. She stepped closer and wrapped her arms around his neck. Don't think that just because you've got an even prettier face now, I'm going to let you tease me. Nate grinned confidently. Really? I haven't seen myself in a mirror, if I couldn't get you off me before, now it's going to be impossible. Alice laughed. Slowly, she leaned toward his lips and whispered in a velvety tone. I wonder, now that you're a vampire, would you taste different? She began to close the distance. Nate inhaled her scent, now, more than ever, magnetic to him. He closed his eyes, closing the space between them. Alice's hand slid down to his chest and, with a swift move, she hooked her foot behind him and pushed, making him fall to the ground. Nate landed sprawled out, somewhere between dazed and amused. Alice threw him a flirtatious smile. I don't think I should make it that easy, you made me worry far too much these past 2 days. Then, with an agile leap, she sprang into the branches of a tree and darted away at high speed. Nate rose in one smooth motion and ran after her. Their laughter echoed through the forest as he chased her from branch to branch, following the fleeting glint of her hair through the leaves. She laughed, a clear, wind-blended sound, dodging him with graceful ease while keeping just ahead. He knew he could catch her at any moment, but chose not to, savoring the chase instead. Hours ago you were a terrifying vampire, Alice called between leaps, and now you can't even catch me, I think you're overrated. Nate smirked to himself, pretending to fail each attempt, letting go of branches at the last second as if his grip were too weak. I'm still getting used to my new body, he said in a deep, playful tone. Besides, I'm lacking motivation. She laughed, glancing back at him with mischief in her eyes. If you catch me, I'll do anything you ask. The words, tossed so lightly, lit a spark in his chest. Alice dropped to the ground and kept running, her feet barely kissing the earth as her sweet scent hung in the air, pulling him forward like an invisible thread. Nate stayed in the treetops a moment longer, watching her with a smile he hadn't worn in a long time. Finally, he dropped down in one fluid motion, his muscles tensing as he pushed himself forward with real speed. Alice sensed him closing in and, unconsciously, slowed just a fraction, laughing as she felt him almost upon her. In a blink, Nate closed the distance and caught her. His arms wrapped firmly around her as momentum sent them rolling over the ground in quick spirals. Nate, conscious of every impact, shifted his body so none of it struck her. Their laughter mingled with the rustle of grass and the scent of damp earth until they stopped. Nate ended up above her, hair slightly mussed and a soft smile contrasting the intensity in his gaze. Alice felt his breath brush her face, and for a moment, the world seemed to fade away. They lay there in silence on the damp, leaf-strewn ground, the night wrapping every detail in darkness, broken only by the silver moonlight filtering through the canopy. Nate's gaze softened, letting the tension slowly dissolve. Alice, with a delicate gesture, slid her hands along his sides, brushing his cold skin beneath the jacket. Without thinking much, he began to lean closer, his face nearing hers with almost ethereal calm. Alice closed her eyes, waiting for the contact of her companion's lips. The kiss was brief, just a few seconds, but in that moment, both felt a deep release. The past few days had been a nightmare of uncertainty and pain, and in that fleeting truce, they allowed themselves the luxury of simply existing together in peace. They knew this instant would be etched in their memories forever. When they parted, Nate lay down beside her, and Alice cupped his face in her hand, studying every line of his cold skin. "I'll really miss your blue eyes," she said softly, "but I always thought you'd look better with golden ones." Nate leaned in again, giving her another kiss, this time only a gentle brush, a caress meant to hold the moment without rushing it. Then he looked at her calmly, his crimson eyes glowing in the gloom. "I love you, Alice." She opened her eyes, a light smile escaping her lips. "You're just saying that to distract me from your red eyes, but I love you too, Nate." They stayed there, lying on the forest floor, enjoying each other's company in silence for several minutes, the fall of leaves and the soft steps of some nearby animal the only shared sounds. Finally, as if only just remembering, Alice spoke in a tone of mock resignation, laced with flirtation. "Well, looks like you won. Now that you've caught me, what do you want to do with me?" Nate smiled, catching the hint instantly, but his confident expression faltered in a blink. His gaze turned hesitant, almost vulnerable, and with some effort, he held hers with his red eyes. In a low, deeply sincere voice, he said, "Please, promise me nothing will happen to you, that you won't leave me alone." Alice looked at him with a flicker of confusion. Nate had always been impressive, strong, confident, but now she understood the weight of what he had endured. Everyone he had given his heart to was gone, and now, with a fragility uncharacteristic of such a powerful vampire, he was pleading for her not to do the same. Moved, she leaned in closer and wrapped her arms tightly around him, pressing their bodies together in the forest's darkness. Closing her eyes, she whispered in his ear, "No matter what happens, you'll have me for all eternity." Nate returned the embrace, melting into it as if it were the last anchor he had to hold on to. There, in the middle of the night, still lying on the cold earth, they let fear and uncertainty turn into a silent, shared determination. Creation is hard, cheer me up. Jayjayempi Creators Thoughts. 17 comments 0 vote. Chapter 122. If you want to support or read some advanced chapters +10, please follow me on patreon.com/jjmp. With their superhuman speed and lack of need for sleep, the trip to Alaska felt shorter than they had anticipated. The night stretched above them like a dark ocean, and the world around them blurred into a succession of shadows and fleeting flashes. Forests, hills, and rivers faded behind them like stains on a canvas that shifted without rest. They avoided populated areas with precise instinct, always keeping far from artificial lights and the murmur of cities. Nate, though recently fed, began to react to certain human scents drifting in from a distance, sweet and warm, a temptation brushing against his throat. A single gust of wind from the wrong direction was enough to draw his attention. Each time it happened, Alice would take his hand firmly, that cold but reassuring contact steadying him, and she would quicken their pace until the fragrance dissolved into the wind. It was halfway through Canada, in a dense, damp forest near a small town, that Nate's thirst became too evident to ignore. The burn in his throat spread like invisible embers, and no icy breath of night air could extinguish it. Alice stopped, watching him closely, her head tilted slightly. Her voice, soft but firm, broke the silence. "I think it's time you fed. For newborns, thirst comes more often, and we're only halfway there." Nate nodded, knowing that fire would only grow. Alice's eyes lit with a hint of anticipation. "We could hunt together. This forest is full of animals." He looked at her for a few seconds, letting the silence weigh before answering with a question he had been carrying for some time. "The Romanians told me the vegetarian diet weakens vampires. How true is that?" Alice paused, her gaze fixed on him, as if weighing how much truth to tell. "There are many advantages to our lifestyle. It helps us maintain control, to keep from losing our minds. But yes, drinking human blood gives a slight boost in strength. Honestly, though, I think the difference is minimal, Nate. He lowered his gaze to the leaf-strewn ground, then lifted it again with an almost apologetic expression. The truth is, I'd rather stay as strong as possible for now. Alice's brow furrowed slightly. So you want to attack some humans? No, he replied immediately, his voice firm. But I think sneaking into a hospital and stealing some blood bags would be a better alternative. She studied him in silence, evaluating not only the idea but the impulse behind it. Finally, she spoke. It's a temporary solution, Nate, but it won't help you learn control. Still, I understand. I'll support you. I'll go get them for you. Nate held her gaze, silent gratitude in his expression. I really appreciate it. It'll only be for a while, then I'll learn your family's lifestyle. Besides, red eyes aren't exactly easy to hide. A light laugh escaped Alice, and before he could say anything more, she spun on her heels and vanished into the trees. The darkness swallowed her in a blink, and the wind stirred by her passing left behind a faint whisper. Nate stood still, feeling the forest close in around him. With Alice near, the ferocity inside him seemed kept at bay, as if her mere presence soothed the beast that had lived within him since his turning. But alone, in the absolute silence, that balance broke. A wave of anger began to spread through him, slow but relentless. Victoria was dead, yet his mind quickly wandered to Riley. He didn't believe he was gone. He wasn't sure how powerful the Quileute spirit warriors were, but he was certain Jacob couldn't take down a vampire on his own. He was still young, and deep down, doubtful. From there, his thoughts strayed to Jacob and Edward. A flash of disappointment cut through him like an icy blade. He felt both had failed him. To different degrees, yes, but neither had been able to protect his grandmother. He hoped his stay in Denali would be long. He didn't want to keep Alice away from her family, but he knew that if either of them appeared before him at this moment, keeping his anger in check would be a fight he might lose. The forest remained still around him, save for the distant crack of a branch under the weight of some nocturnal animal. Nate sank to the damp ground, unmoving, trying to smother the swell of emotions drowning him. As a newborn, everyone had warned him that his emotions would be amplified to the point of being unbearable. Now he understood, it hadn't been an exaggeration. Alice had been gone only a few minutes when a pang of unease pierced him. It was more than worry, it was a physical need, an invisible pull urging him to find her, to not let her out of his sight. Fortunately, a figure soon emerged between the trees, gliding through the shadows as if she had always belonged to them. Alice returned with light steps, and Nate's eyes went to her instantly. In her arms, awkwardly stacked, were several blood bags, so many they seemed to almost swallow her small frame in plastic and dark red. The contrast drew an involuntary smile from Nate, and the sharp pang of anger consuming him began to dissolve like smoke. With a mischievous smile, Alice let the bags drop in front of him. I think this will be enough for a few days. Then, with a fluid motion, she took off the backpack she'd been carrying and set it aside. I did buy the backpack. When she opened it, Nate saw more blood bags inside, neatly arranged. Instinctively, he began counting them, his mind calculating how to ration them so he wouldn't have to go out again soon, but the moment he tore open the first one, all planning vanished. The thick, metallic scent hit him hard, and the thirst, that voracious instinct beyond reason, took over. He leaned into the bags, drinking from several in quick succession, without pause, feeling the liquid heat slide down his throat and ignite every fiber of his body. When he finally let out a satisfied breath, Alice took the backpack and casually slung it over her shoulder again. I'd better hold onto this. That way, we avoid raiding more hospitals than necessary. Nate, a thin line of blood still marking the corner of his lips, wiped it away with his forearm. He murmured his thanks, noticing then how the scent that had intoxicated him was also affecting Alice, barely perceptible in the way her pupils dilated for an instant before she averted her gaze. Nate smiled at the sight of her wrestling with her own instinct, her eyes on him for a second before she looked away. You know, even though I'm full, I could help you hunt. It'll be fun. Alice tilted her head, and a slow smile curved her lips. Sure, I could use a meal too. What do you feel like eating? Nate asked, curious. She gave a thoughtful shrug, her eyes glinting playfully. The men in our family tend to go for bears or big cats, but I'm fine with a deer or a fox. Though I admit, hunting larger animals is much more fun. Nate understood perfectly. He closed his eyes, letting the forest silence speak to him. He heard the soft crack of branches under the hooves of several moose moving slowly. Above, in the canopy's tangle, tense squirrels hid, frozen, aware of his presence. Farther away, a cougar stalked, its breathing controlled and low, waiting for its prey to make a mistake. He was about to choose the big cat when a deep, powerful huff broke the air. The sound was dense and resonant in his ears. He smiled faintly. A bear. Without words, he inclined his head toward the right direction, and Alice understood instantly. As they moved through the undergrowth, the scent of damp earth and crushed leaves lingered around them. Nate, eyes on the path, broke the silence. I want you to tell me about the Denali, about the vampires I'll be living with. Alice glanced at him with curiosity, her eyes shining under the moonlight filtering through the treetops. You've already seen them, she said with a calm smile. They're a big group, like us, mostly women. But now, with Laurent and you, there will be 3 men. That's good. Eleazar was starting to feel a bit lonely. She paused, choosing her words carefully. They're good people, but Kate might challenge you a couple of times. She was impressed by how quickly you beat her. With her gift, she felt practically invincible. Tanya, on the other hand, will probably want to talk to you. She was interested in Edward not long ago, so she might ask you a lot about Bella. Nate took in every detail, memorizing the information. His gaze stayed fixed on the forest rushing past them, every tree and shadow blurring into green and gray. Then Alice seemed to remember something else. Her expression tightened slightly, her shoulders hunching a fraction, and her voice lowered with a hint of unease. Ah, and if you can, it's best not to mention the Volturi around them. Nate raised an eyebrow, curiosity sparked. Why? Are they connected to them? He asked as the wind cut across their faces, carrying the damp scent of the forest and the faint smell of nocturnal wildlife. Alice hesitated for a moment before speaking, as if reliving a painful memory. Their creator was killed by the Volturi. She was like a mother to them, but she committed the crime of creating an immortal child. When the Volturi found out, they killed her and the child. The others survived because Arrow read their memories and saw they knew nothing. Her voice dropped, heavier and trembling. It left deep scars on them. Nate felt a knot in his chest, an instinctive reflection of empathy. He, too, had lost his mother to the Volturi, and though rage bubbled beneath his skin, he chose to remain silent, letting the information settle as they moved deeper into the forest. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and foliage. The crunch of dry leaves underfoot and the space between the trees seemed to set their own slow, expectant rhythm. Then, a deep huff split the night, reverberating among the trunks. His senses caught the smell of fur and disturbed soil. It was a large bear, alert and dominant, aware of them. Nate nodded to Alice, and together, moving cautiously, they approached their target, every muscle tense and every sense sharpened. Nate leapt forward, landing in front of the bear, which froze for a moment, startled by his sudden presence. Its eyes gleamed, and a deep roar vibrated in the air as it sniffed at him cautiously. Suddenly, the bear rose on its hind legs, swiping claws that cut through the air with a menacing hiss. Nate dodged each strike with feline precision, his movements smooth and quick, barely disturbing the dry leaves on the ground. With a mix of amusement and puzzlement on his face, he turned to Alice, still evading the animal's attacks. So, how are we supposed to do this? Do I kill it in one blow or what? Alice let out a soft laugh, the sweet sound breaking the forest's tense air. Actually, only Emmett plays around with bears, she said, her eyes glinting in the shadows. The rest of us prefer to go straight for the neck and feed. Nate nodded in understanding, muscles taut as he dodged another swipe. With a calculated leap, he landed behind the bear, his hands gripping the back of its neck. With precise force, he shoved it to the ground, feeling the resistance of its heavy body. The bear whimpered, clearly frightened at being unable to move. Its paws flailed, stirring leaves and dirt, its hot breath mingling with the night's cold air. Alice watched for a moment, her gaze tracing Nate's every movement. Her voice, barely a whisper, slid between the trees. Now I understand why you're so terrifying, you can be incredibly forceful. Nate shrugged, a faint smile on his lips. I think of myself as more practical, he said, leaving enough space for Alice to approach the animal's neck. She didn't hesitate. With an elegant, swift leap, she lunged at the bear's neck, her fangs sinking eagerly into its warm skin, drinking in the heat of its blood. Her eyes gleamed with an intense golden light as she fed, absorbing the animal's vitality, while Nate stayed at her side, watchful, every sense attuned to any sound or movement in the forest that could interrupt her hunt. Nate stood watching Alice for a while as she fed. The scent of fresh blood was intense, almost stinging, and he understood why vegetarianism didn't have many adherents among vampires. Human blood gave off a heady, deep aroma, while animal blood carried a harsher, earthier note that wasn't entirely pleasant. He drifted briefly into thought about how feeding from such an animal didn't appeal to him, but his attention stayed on Alice, whose manner of drinking was as precise as it was elegant. When Alice finished, she pulled back from the bear's neck and took a deep breath, her golden eyes shining with satisfaction. Nate, distracted in his thoughts, asked, "So, what are we supposed to do with the body?" Alice shrugged, a soft laugh mingling with the whisper of wind through the trees. "We just leave it here. Other predators in the forest will take care of it." Nate frowned slightly. "Sounds a bit strange, it could leave traces." Alice looked at him calmly, as if the answer were obvious. "My family's been doing this for years. Trust me, it works." He nodded slowly, realizing there was no reason to doubt the coven's tradition. With the tension of the hunt dissipating, they continued on their way. Their bodies moved with precision, almost skimming the ground as they advanced through the forest in silence. Every shadow, every scent, every distant crack was caught by their heightened senses, but neither reacted. It took them several hours to cover the remaining distance, crossing the rest of the country with practiced efficiency. Luckily for Nate, Alice had visited the Denali house several times before and knew the optimal route. Finally, night gave way to day, and day to evening, when at last the Denali house came into view, elegant and serene, its facade bathed in the warm light of the setting sun. At the door, the Denali coven stood together, watching the newcomers' arrival. Their gazes met Nate's and Alice's, assessing them with curiosity and a trace of expectation. The air between the groups was charged with a mix of formality, anticipation, and the subtle tension that always accompanied meetings between vampires. Alice squeezed Nate's hand lightly as they approached, a small gesture that carried trust and complicity, while he, aware of the long journey and what was to come, prepared himself to meet the new coven. Creation is hard, cheer me up. Jayjayempi Creators Thoughts. 14 comments 0 vote. Chapter 123. If you want to support or read some advanced chapters +10, please follow me on patreon.com/jjmp. The snow crunched softly beneath their feet as Nate and Alice crossed the clearing that led to the entrance of the house. The dark wooden facade rose imposingly against the sky, painted in hues of gold and orange by the setting sun, its wide windows reflecting warm glimmers that contrasted with the chill of the air. In front of the main door, the Denali coven stood in perfect formation, their silhouettes outlined by the light escaping from within. Tanya was the first to step forward. Her golden hair caught the last brightness of the day, glowing like threads of fire. She smiled with genuine warmth, opening her arms with a familiarity that eased the solemnity of the moment. "Welcome, I'm so glad you've arrived." Alice responded with the same warmth, while Nate remained silent, calmly observing each of those present. His eyes met Kate's, and the intensity of her gaze was almost a challenge. There was a fierce spark in it that confirmed what Alice had already warned him: it wouldn't be long before that woman tried to test him. Irina, on the other hand, gave him only a brief glance and a curt nod before turning all her attention to Alice. She walked toward her with a serene, almost affectionate expression. Carmen, subtler, offered Nate a small smile before joining Irina and wrapping Alice in a gentle embrace. Laurent and Eleazar seemed the most pleased with their arrival. Eleazar stepped forward with calm strides, curiosity gleaming in his golden eyes. "I'm glad it didn't take you too long to get here." Then he fixed his gaze on Nate for a few seconds, a curious smile spreading across his friendly features. "Forgive me if I sound intrusive, but your gift fascinates me. I've seen many throughout my life, but yours, I still can't quite understand it." Nate gave a modest smile. "Honestly, all of this is still very new to me. But I think we'll have enough time to figure it out. I'll be in your care." Eleazar nodded in satisfaction, almost paternal, giving him a brief pat on the shoulder. There was something about him that evoked Carlyle, though without the same imposing solemnity. He radiated kindness, but in a more down-to-earth, almost youthful way. Laurent waited patiently until their exchange was done, then approached with firm steps and a smile heavy with nostalgia. "I must say, Nathaniel, immortality suits you. I always knew you had potential. I'm glad it didn't take you long to reach it." The words halted him for a moment. To Nate, this power had come too late, as if every second of delay carried a silent regret. Yet instead of sinking into that shadow, curiosity about Laurent's words pushed him to reply. "What do you mean by potential?" he asked with genuine intrigue. "The few times we met, I didn't do much, but you seemed very interested in me turning You even offered to bite me yourself. Laurent seemed somewhat reserved, weighing how much to say, but eventually yielded. To tell the truth, I have the gift of sensing people's power. It's not that specific. Power can manifest in different ways: influence, abilities, potential, but whenever I feel it, it helps me distinguish how promising someone is. Nate listened intently. Unconsciously, he began calculating the possible applications of such an ability, anticipating moves, evaluating allies, measuring risks. Quite convenient, though he chose not to appear too interested. In a neutral tone, he asked, "And what about now? How does my power feel to you?" Laurent smiled, almost as if the question amused him. "It's incredible. I don't know exactly what you're capable of, but I feel that no matter what I tried against you, nothing would work." Nate nodded, once again noting how Laurent always sought, in one way or another, to leave a good impression. Though Nate didn't consider him entirely trustworthy, he had already assessed him as someone useful. Not wanting to prolong the conversation further, he added, "As I get used to my new condition as a vampire, I hope I can count on you as a training partner for a while." Laurent responded with enthusiasm, and Nate noticed how his red eyes gleamed with curiosity and genuine interest. It was clear that Laurent was delighted at the idea of getting closer. When they finished speaking, Tanya left Alice's side and approached Nate. She walked calmly, with the confidence of someone fully aware of her own allure. She examined him from head to toe and, in a low, slightly playful tone, remarked, "Well, aren't you quite the specimen? Seems like the Cullens always manage to keep the good ones." Nate studied her carefully. The tone held a trace of flirtation, but it didn't feel serious, rather, it seemed her usual way of speaking. Without discomfort, he replied with a courteous smile. "I appreciate you letting us stay here as long as I need to gain control. Besides, I know it can be complicated having a newborn around, so I apologize in advance if I cause any trouble." Tanya widened her eyes, a mix of surprise and mischief on her face. Who would have thought the terrifying vampire we met in the factory would be so polite? She then darted a side glance at Kate without moving her head, continuing aloud, "But don't worry, it's always nice to have someone strong enough to protect us around." Nate carefully observed Kate's reaction. She was glaring at him, clearly proud and aware of her place. It was evident that Tanya was relishing the chance to provoke her. The interaction intrigued him. He could sense the tension, but also the subtle game between them. Alice, who had been following every move, stepped up to Nate with a graceful stride, linking her arm with his. The simple yet protective gesture seemed meant to reassure. In a friendly, relaxed tone, she asked Tanya which room would be theirs. Tanya let her gaze linger for a moment on their intertwined arms, a playful smile tugging at her lips, before leading them on a short tour of the house. They walked through spacious, luminous halls, where strategically placed lamps highlighted the elegance of the wood and architectural details. She showed them Irina and Lawrence's rooms first, then Eleazar and Carmen's, and finally Kate's and her own. Each space carried its occupant's personality, some with sober, classic furniture, others with more modern and personal touches. At the end of the tour, Tanya brought them to a room at the back of the White House. "This is the guest room," she explained. "You're free to decorate it however you like while you're here." She gave them their space, and then each member of the coven returned to their own routines, leaving the two alone to settle in. Nate and Alice entered the room, taking in every detail. It was spacious and bright, with large windows letting in the sunset glow. Bookshelves filled with volumes of all kinds lined the walls, some neatly arranged, others more casually stacked. In one corner, a vintage record player rested atop a low cabinet, surrounded by vinyls waiting to be played. At the center of the room, the bed immediately drew attention. It was large, with perfectly stretched sheets and soft pillows. Nate noticed it looked new, almost as if the Denali had bought it recently, likely with their guests, or the couple, in mind, rather than for themselves, given that vampires had no need of sleep. All around, small details added warmth. A floor lamp casting a golden glow, a comfortable armchair near the window, and soft rugs muffling every step. Nate mentally assessed the place. Plenty of space to move freely, corners to organize their things, and an atmosphere designed to offer comfort and privacy without losing functionality. Alice moved naturally through the room, browsing the shelves and touching a few books with a smile. Nate watched her, appreciating the harmony her presence added to the space. It was a safe place, meant to integrate them into the coven's life, and Nate felt a certain calm knowing it offered them a proper refuge to adapt to this new life. After letting her gaze roam the room, Alice walked over to Nate and, with a look of distaste, ran her fingers across the dark clothes he still wore. They were the garments given to him by the Romanians. She wrinkled her nose and, without hesitation, began removing his jacket. I know these clothes are practical, but seeing you in them makes me think of the Romanians. Nate chuckled softly at her determination and shifted slightly to make it easier for her. You won't have to think about them for a while. I doubt they'll reach out anytime soon, they'll be too busy. Alice stared at him for several seconds, with those eyes that seemed to pierce through any mask Nate might put up. Her voice came out deeper and more serious than usual. Please, promise me that when they do contact you, you'll let me come with you. I don't trust them, I'll be much calmer if I'm close. Nate raised a brow, sensing the absolute sincerity behind her words. For an instant, he thought of how much Alice had worried during the days he was alone with the Romanians. He let out a low laugh, as if to ease the tension, and answered with a certainty that wasn't meant to impress but to reassure. I promise, besides, even if I didn't want to, I'm sure the moment they decide to approach, you'll see it in your visions. But you don't have to worry. Whether it's the Romanians or anyone else, I'll keep you safe from everything. Alice gazed at him in silence, the seriousness in her features gradually softening, as if Nate's certainty drew out a smile she couldn't contain. Her eyes grew tender, and in a playful tone, she replied. You say that, but you'll always need my help. Nate let out another short laugh, this one more sincere, and wrapped her in his arms, pulling her close until he felt her fully against him. Always. They stayed like that, gazing at each other in a silence that needed no words. The air was charged with the complicity they shared, an unspoken understanding that could only exist between them. A few seconds passed before Alice gently pulled away, stepping back. Speaking of help, she said with a mischievous gleam in her eyes, I think I'll go out with Tanya to buy a few things. We don't have anything besides the blood bags, and I'm not about to tolerate you wearing those clothes any longer. Nate watched her with amusement, tilting his head slightly with a crooked smile. That sounds good, I suppose it was about time I changed uniforms. Alice arched a brow, satisfied he wasn't objecting, and headed for the door with a light air, as though the very idea of replacing those clothes was already a relief to her. In the meantime, Nate added, glancing toward the living room where the Denali were scattered in their routines, I'll take the chance to talk with Eliezer. With his experience, I think I can figure out exactly what I'm capable of. Nate's smile lingered as he watched her leave, but inside he was already organizing questions. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but one thing was clear, he would need to understand every ounce of his strength in order to face it. Author's notes. Hey guys, I know some of you don't like the quiet chapters, just so you don't despair and get an idea, the quiet chapters just ended on Patreon, so they're missing like 8 or 9 chapters before returning to the action, this is more like a development arc. Chapter 124. If you want to support or read some advanced chapters +10 please follow me on patreon.com/jayjayempi. Alice stepped out of the guest room with light, purposeful steps and headed straight for Tanya. It took them only a few minutes to decide to go shopping for clothes and a few other items that would make Alice and Nate's stay at the Denali house more comfortable. Carmen and Irina immediately joined in, energized by Alice's enthusiasm, as if this little adventure were the perfect excuse to shift the pace of the afternoon. They quickly tried to drag Kate along too, but she let out a dismissive huff and sank further into the back of the armchair, eyes fixed on the book in her hands as if the suggestion were utterly trivial. Eliezer, meanwhile, seemed tempted to accompany them, perhaps just to pass the time. However, before he could decide, Nate approached with calm steps. Since it looks like we'll have a little time alone, how about I take you up on your offer and get your help understanding my gift? He said with a slight smile, though a note of contained expectation lingered in his voice. Eliezer's eyes lit up with immediate, unmistakable interest. He rose with elegance, straightening his shoulders, and nodded firmly. That sounds far more interesting than a night of shopping. Laurent, who had been observing from the corner of the room, stepped away from the wall in a quick, fluid motion. In the blink of an eye, he was alongside them. I'll join too. That way we can get to know each other better. Kate, despite pretending indifference, finally lifted her gaze from the book. Her eyes lingered on Nate for a few seconds, coldly appraising him. Finally, she snapped the book shut and stood. Without a word, she walked to the front of the house and seated herself on the facade, arms crossed. She didn't truly blend in, but her presence made it clear she would participate, even if only as a spectator. Meanwhile, the girls were already preparing to leave. Tanya was the first to cross the doorway, urging the others along with the excuse that night would fall soon. Carmen and Irina quickly followed. Before stepping outside, they bid farewell to their partners with small, affectionate gestures that filled the room with warmth. Alice was the last to move. As she passed Nate, she lightly brushed the back of her hand along his arm in an intimate, almost secret gesture that left a quiet warmth lingering. Their eyes met, and Alice gave him a brief, knowing smile, loaded with unspoken promises, before turning to join the others. In the next instant, everything happened in a gust of wind. The four of them sprinted into the forest, their bodies transforming into streaks of speed, leaving behind a swirl of cold air that fluttered the curtains and a trail of laughter that faded among the trees. Nate caught snippets of their animated debate over which shops to visit first, overlapping voices drifting like a joyful echo across the snow. When silence returned, Eleazar stepped forward a few paces, stopping in the clearing in front of the house. His stance was that of a teacher about to begin a lesson. Laurent followed, calm but alert, concealing genuine interest. Kate remained on the facade, relaxed yet attentive, as if nothing could escape her notice. Eleazar gestured for Nate to come closer. Nate walked toward him with steady steps, feeling the weight of what was about to begin. Once face to face, Eleazar cleared his throat and straightened his back even more. All right, he said in a tone combining patience and enthusiasm. To start, tell me in detail what you believe your gift can do. Nate seemed to think for only a few seconds, his gaze fixed on the ground as if arranging invisible pieces in his mind. Then he spoke calmly. Honestly, I don't feel it's a gift. When I was human, my mind helped me analyze and solve things. It was like someone tossed a puzzle in the air, and as soon as it landed, the pieces fit together to give me the answer. Now that I'm a vampire, the process is much faster. I only need fractions of a second to understand what's happening, whether it's a situation or a person. Eleazar listened attentively, nodding slowly as each of Nate's words seemed to form a mental map. Noticing a pause, he intervened with an interested tone. But exactly how do you use it? For example, I was very intrigued when Kate entered the factory to stop you. Instead of confronting her with violence, you deflected her with a single move. Anyone else would have fought until defeating their opponent, but you consciously avoided touching her. Nate recalled that scene easily, as if rewinding a memory were as natural as breathing. It had happened just a day before, and he explained it almost indifferently, without embellishment. At that moment, I didn't know who Kate was, I'd never seen her in person. But when she attacked, her stance was too open. Her movements were erratic, almost as if she only wanted to reach me with her hands, yet there was no tension in her body for a second strike. That caught my attention because usually an attacker immediately prepares to continue, but she didn't. Her energy was concentrated in a single contact, as if she knew one touch would be enough. So I thought it wiser to deflect her with one move and wait to see what she'd do next. Kate, who had remained silent until then, suddenly rose, her face flushed. Her steps rang out firm and fast as she approached, visibly upset. So that's why you beat me. You're saying if I'd been more persistent in my attacks, I could have defeated you right there. Nate showed no sign of agitation. His voice was confident, but devoid of arrogance. I don't think so. Now that I know what you can do, I can't imagine losing to you. The words, spoken with such certainty, seemed to ignite Kate even further. A spark of fury crossed her eyes as she raised her hand, fingers curled like claws, her expression transforming into a palpable threat. Then let's put it to the test. Tension surged suddenly, as if the air itself had thickened. Eleazar intervened swiftly, raising both hands to stand between them, his voice firm and urging. Wait. Remember the purpose of all this. First, I want to understand Nate's ability. The echo of his words hung for a moment, marking a fragile line between calm and a confrontation that could erupt at any instant. Seconds passed until Kate regained her composure and set aside her obvious annoyance. Eleazar, with his usual calm interest, suggested observing Nate's ability in action. The way he described it seemed far too applicable to a confrontation to ignore. Nate nodded silently, accepting the challenge without a word. Kate, who had stayed nearby, quickly stepped toward him, a spark in her eyes, clearly ready to be the first to test him. However, Eleazar extended an arm, placing a firm hand on her shoulder. I think it would be better if Laurent went first. You might get carried away. Kate glared for a moment, annoyed by the suggestion. Her amber eyes flicked toward Nate, daring him, and seeing no trace of fear, she huffed in frustration. Then she turned and returned to her spot on the facade, collapsing back into the seat to watch, with the same distant expression as before, though now with a more evident interest. Laurent, in contrast, grinned with delight. I'll be more than happy to help. They positioned themselves face to face, a few steps from the house entrance. Eleazar, with a patient gesture, stepped aside. It will be just a brief sparring. No need to hurt each other, he instructed neutrally. Nate inclined his head in acknowledgement, and Laurent did the same. Silence settled over the scene, broken only by the cold wind weaving through the nearby trees. Nate closed his eyes for a second. When he opened them, his expression had changed. His face was now severe, calculating, and in the depths of his gaze was a contained darkness that sent a slight shiver through those watching. Suddenly, his presence felt denser, almost threatening, and Laurent, despite knowing he wouldn't be harmed, felt a slight knot in his stomach. Eleazar stepped back a few paces, raising a hand as a signal. Begin. Laurent moved immediately, lunging forward like a gust, his steps so swift they stirred whispers in the snow. The attack was direct, impulsive, with the force characteristic of his kind, but Nate didn't react with the same brutality. He remained still, observing, reading Laurent's body language as if the intentions were drawn in the air before being executed. The contrast was clear. Laurent's experience in physical combat seemed limited, or perhaps he simply lacked aptitude for the fight. The instant his fist descended toward him, Nate moved with surgical precision. With a fluid twist, he caught Laurent's wrist mid-attack, used the momentum of the blow, and guided him down, bending him over himself. Before Laurent could react, he was pinned to the ground, his arm twisted behind his back firmly but without cruelty. It all happened within seconds. Laurent, breathing heavily more from surprise than effort, let out a nervous laugh from the ground, incredulous at how easily he had been subdued. Nate didn't take long to release him. Though unnecessary, he offered a hand to help him up. The gesture was polite but distant, his expression, previously sharp, softened to an indifferent, almost expressionless frown. The others didn't look away. Kate had stood, eyes wide, incredulous at how quickly and easily Nate had neutralized Laurent. What was unsettling was that it hadn't seemed luck, it looked as though Nate had known exactly what move his opponent would make before he even attempted it. Eleazar, on the other hand, remained calm, hand on his chin, murmuring thoughtfully. Could it be some kind of premonition? No, I feel the analysis has something to do with it, but it seems separate from his gift. As if it were a tool that complements it. His thoughtful tone faded into a murmur, and he returned his gaze to Nate with analytical eyes. One sparring match was clearly not enough to understand him. He took a deep breath and, without wanting to dismiss Laurent, turned to Kate. His expression grew serious as he asked. Are you sure you can face him without getting carried away? Kate arched an eyebrow, and a fierce smile appeared on her face, revealing more competitiveness than amusement. She leaned slightly forward, hands on her knees, before standing straight with natural confidence. Of course. It's just to help the new member of the family. Her words sounded like a joke, but in her tone lay the promise that she wouldn't hold back easily. Nate observed her silently, his opaque calm betraying no emotion. Yet he understood immediately. Kate was not Laurent. Treating her lightly would be a mistake. Eleazar still seemed hesitant, though not enough to stop them. Finally, he sighed and warned firmly. Remember, it's only sparring. The words hung like an invisible boundary that neither seemed fully willing to respect. Kate stepped forward, lowering her body slightly while extending her hands, ready to spring at any moment. Her stance radiated contained energy, like a spring about to release its force. Nate, in contrast, showed no aggressive gesture. He opened his stance slightly, planting his feet firmly, and fixed his eyes on Kate's. The intensity in his gaze was cold and calculated, as if every detail of her body were already dissected in his mind. The atmosphere tensed, and for a moment, even the air seemed to hold its breath. Creation is hard, cheer me up. Jayjayempi Creators Thoughts. 17 comments 0 vote. Chapter 125. If you want to support or read some advanced chapters +10 please follow me on patreon.com/jjmp. The atmosphere grew tense, almost electric. Snow crunched beneath the weight of those present, the cold air barely noticeable against the anticipation that thickened with every passing second. Eleazar, arms crossed, observed them both. His eyes flicked from Nate to Kate and back, searching for something in their gestures, in their stances. For a moment, a flicker of doubt crossed his mind, a whisper that made him hold his breath. But when he saw that they were both perfectly positioned, ready, he let out a resigned sigh and took a few steps back. He raised his hand solemnly and announced firmly. Begin. Nate planted his feet firmly in the snow, leaning his body slightly forward, arms prepared, tension etched into his muscles. Across from him, Kate didn't hesitate. She lunged forward with swift, almost feline movements, eyes flashing with the spark of someone unwilling to lose twice to the same opponent. She had already experienced the brutality of one of his kicks. She remembered too well the sharp impact, the pain, and the humiliation. This time, she wouldn't fall for the same trick. As Nate adjusted his stance, hinting at a direct kick to her stomach, Kate smiled mid-run. She had seen it coming. She lowered her arm, ready to intercept the kick and use her gift to neutralize it. But Nate, with a calm that froze the blood, lifted his leg a few inches higher than usual, and instead of striking the torso, his foot hit Kate squarely in the face. The blow echoed hollowly, and in an instant, the young woman's body was sent flying several meters, raising a cloud of snow that spread like breath in the cold air. Eliezer's eyes widened, surprised, tracking her trajectory until she landed heavily in the snow. Kate, furious, gritted her teeth as she recovered, the skin on her cheeks slightly cracked from the impact. A growl of rage escaped her throat as she lunged at him again, this time lowering her stance, making herself a harder target to kick. Nate, never taking his eyes off her, spun with calculated grace, as if he had trained that move 1,000 times. And when Kate came close enough, he struck with the back of his hand in a brutal swipe. The impact was sharp, sending her airborne once more. Snow rose again as Kate fell for the second time. Her breathing was heavy, her anger building with every fiber of her being. She got up with a frown, lips pressed tight, her fury almost tangible in her gaze. Eliezer, however, didn't take his eyes off Nate. His face reflected something more complex than surprise. He seemed to be calculating, analyzing each of the young man's moves, as if trying to solve a precise equation. In a low voice, almost a whisper to himself, he said, "He seems to be holding back." The comment didn't escape Kate's ears. Her gaze flicked to him, and upon hearing those words, her anger transformed into something sharper, humiliation. Feeling that Nate wasn't fighting seriously, that the one who had made her bite the snow twice in a row was still holding back, was more painful than any physical blow. A stifled roar escaped her throat, and with renewed fury, she propelled herself at Nate, determined to show she didn't need mercy or limits. Kate ran forward, intending to strike again, but stopped abruptly a few meters from Nate. The memory of the 2 previous times still burned her pride. She knew that if she lunged recklessly, he would use her momentum and she'd end up in the snow again. She clenched her jaw, assumed a guard, and advanced in slow, calculated steps, keeping just the right distance. Her mind buzzed with a single thought. She only needed one contact, a single touch, and everything would go her way. Yet Nate stood firm, unmoved, as if her reaching him meant nothing. He watched her silently. His red eyes, intense and penetrating, radiated a fierce presence that chilled the air between them. His face remained serene, almost indifferent, as if this confrontation were nothing more than a pastime, a game in which he always had the advantage. From the house's facade, Laurent sought a better angle to not miss a detail of the fight. His eyes narrowed, intrigued. It wasn't the first time he noticed it, but this time it was more evident. When Nate entered combat, he seemed to transform. His posture became darker, his style more ruthless and precise, almost cruel. The warmth he showed beside Alice vanished completely, giving way to a fighter who saw battle not as a risk but as a calculated procedure. Kate, still circling Nate in short arcs, noticed that indifference on his face and felt her anger rising. Each time she saw that expression, as if he measured her effortlessly and without concern, the fury within her ignited stronger. Kate closed the distance slowly, her firm steps sinking into the icy snow. Her golden eyes shone with contained fury, and when she raised her fists, she moved with lightning speed. Her blows began to fall in rapid bursts, barely distinguishable in trajectory, as if her arms sliced through the air with sharp whistles. Nate didn't move violently, but with precise motion. His body rotated just enough, his shoulders tilted with mathematical accuracy, dodging each strike as if he already knew the path of every attack before it happened. When a punch seemed certain to graze him, Nate raised his hand instantly, striking Kate's arm with an open palm, redirecting the trajectory without ever touching her bare skin. His fingers targeted only the material of her jacket, careful to the last detail. Frustration began to rise in Kate, visible in the tightening of her jaw and the fire in her eyes. Each time she thought she cornered him, Nate disarmed her with a simple deflection. She clenched her teeth, leapt agilely backward, and without hesitation tore off her jacket. She was left with a short-sleeved blouse exposing the skin where her gift pulsed. A fierce smile crossed her face. Come on. Don't hold back. All you do is defend yourself. She roared, her arms trembling with the energy that began to surge through her. Nate squinted, and his deep, controlled voice cut through the cold air. If we continue, I'll end up hurting you. Mockery snapped from Kate's lips like a whip. Do it if you can. Because I won't hesitate. Her arms began to tremble slightly, charged with her gift coursing through every tendon and vein like a river of fire. With a wild scream, she lunged at Nate, enveloped in her own power. For a moment, Nate's face darkened. His aura shifted, heavy, almost oppressive. His eyes glowed a shadowed red, and his expression became that of a predator ready to strike without restraint. Eleazar, who had until then observed silently, widened his eyes in alarm and shouted to stop them. Enough. But his voice was lost in the thunder of Kate's steps as she launched like a lightning bolt toward Nate. He moved with impossible speed. Sliding under Kate's leap, he appeared behind her and, with a precise palm strike to her lower back, made her stagger violently. Kate growled, seeking balance, and reflexively swiped backward, the force of her gift running through her fingers like gleaming blades. Nate twisted his torso just enough, eyes blazing, opening his palm in a clean arc. The cut descended over the junction of Kate's shoulder and arm, striking with brutal precision. Kate's scream tore through the air as her arm separated, and instinctively she gripped the opposite hand to the stump, clutching it as pain surged through her. Nate stepped back. Even in that brief contact, the pain hit him like lightning, a fierce jolt coursed through his body, shaking him from within. His breathing became heavy, but he didn't stop. Kate tried to recover, her fury still burning despite the mutilation. Nate, leaving no space, jumped lightly upward. His leg fell like an axe on Kate's head, slamming her into the hardened snow. The impact echoed like a dull thunderclap. Before she could rise, Nate advanced swiftly and firmly, pressing her back to the ground with the sole of his foot. The snow compressed beneath their bodies. That's enough. He roared, his aura enveloping him like a chained beast about to break free. The makeshift training ground fell silent, broken only by Kate's heavy breathing and the crunch of snow beneath her still body. Kate lay on the ground, Nate's foot pressing her back against the icy snow. She felt the gravity in his voice, that firmness allowing no reply, and understood there was no escape. With a slow sigh, she lowered her head into the cold white and admitted defeat. Nate removed his foot and stepped back, breathing steadily, red eyes still glowing with an unsettling ferocity. That gesture of stepping away, marking distance after asserting dominance, reminded him of how he had treated Victoria in the past. Anger began to stir within him, but he forced himself to remain calm. The Denalis were not enemies, he reminded himself. Eleazar hurried to help Kate to her feet. Laurent, meanwhile, ran to where her severed arm had fallen and carefully retrieved it. He knelt in front of Kate and began precisely reattaching it. The process was long and tense, several minutes during which Nate could only watch. Kate closed her eyes, teeth clenched, enduring the pain, her ragged breaths resonating in the winter silence. Finally, a brief, sharp crack broke the stillness. The joint clicked into place, the skin gradually closing, and the arm returned to its proper position. Kate exhaled a deep, relieved sigh and murmured with a tired grimace. We were lucky, the cut was clean. Otherwise, it would have taken longer to heal. Eleazar, calmer seeing her recovered, turned to Nate. The young vampire remained motionless, gaze lost in a distant point, trapped in his own thoughts. Eleazar approached slowly and spoke in a calm voice. Don't worry, no one blames you. We were all novices once, it's hard to control yourself. And Kate didn't make it easy either. The words drew a snort of annoyance from Kate. She trudged away, snow crunching under her boots. Passing Nate, she paused briefly, though she didn't look directly at him. Her voice, rough but sincere, broke the tension. Don't be ashamed of being good at what you do, you're definitely an impressive warrior. Without waiting for a reply, she continued toward the house and disappeared through the door. The three remaining vampires stayed silent for a few more seconds, letting the echo of the confrontation fade into the cold air. Laurent broke the quiet, conciliatory. I think we should calm down and relax. We'll have more time to explore Nathaniel's ability later. Eleazar nodded, agreeing. He placed a firm, understanding hand on Nate's back, guiding him gently toward the house. Together, with tension still lingering, they returned to the warmth of home. Inside, calm gradually replaced the intensity of the duel. Laurent and Eleazar moved toward a corner near the fireplace, immediately resuming a lively conversation. Their tone fluctuated between scientific fascination and wild speculation, each throwing out theories about what they had witnessed in Nate. They discussed his anticipatory abilities, the way he seemed to control his movements with a calculated instinct, almost as if he had studied Kate beforehand. Neither could structure a definitive hypothesis, but both were too excited to stop. Nate, on the other hand, seemed tired of the scrutiny. He walked slowly to a sofa, took a small music player from a side table, and put on nearby headphones. He sank into the couch, arms crossed, closing his eyes as music filled his mind. He wasn't seeking distraction, he was trying to quell the fire inside, the insidious anxiety that still demanded more combat. Kate, calmer after regaining her composure, settled on another sofa. She held the same book she had been reading earlier and, with measured gestures, got lost in its pages again. Yet, despite trying to appear indifferent, she couldn't help glancing up occasionally, throwing furtive looks at Nate. Her eyes studied him with a mix of curiosity and confusion, trying to understand what kind of being this boy really was, the one who could transform in seconds into a fierce and relentless force. Hours passed slowly. The constant murmur of Eleazar and Lawrence's conversation filled the room, full of ideas ranging from plausible to impossible. Kate turned pages calmly, her mind drifting repeatedly toward the young man who remained relaxed a few meters away. Nate had left the headphones on the table, leaning back, exhaling a long sigh as if trying to shake off an invisible weight. Then something changed. A familiar scent reached him, sharp, unmistakable. His senses reacted before his mind, he sat up alert on the sofa. Not long after, clear, vibrant laughter approached from outside, growing closer. The sound filtered in from the house entrance, followed by the echo of footsteps and female voices, filling the air with freshness and lightness. The door opened, and the group of girls returned home, radiating energy. They carried several shopping bags, some hanging from their arms, others held carelessly while sharing stories from their small excursion. Their relaxed expressions contrasted sharply with the heavy atmosphere that had dominated the house that afternoon. The living room, which had held suppressed tension, was immediately infused with the vitality and carefree spark of their return. The girls settled into the living room, leaving bags scattered around, as if the contents of each package infused the space with the promise of comfort and novelty. Alice, her bright smile almost radiant, approached Nate with confident, purposeful steps. Without hesitation, she perched on his lap, settling naturally as if the space had always belonged to her. Her face leaned toward him, depositing a soft, brief, playful kiss on his cheek before asking, with a mischievous, curious glint in her eyes. "How was it for you while I was gone?" Nate couldn't help but smile. He felt the weight of her body, the firmness of her presence, and the comfort of closeness. He wrapped his arms around her, pressing his hands into the softness of her back, and with a tender gesture, kissed the tip of her nose. In a low voice, barely hiding his satisfaction, he replied. Nothing too interesting happened. The exchange immediately caught the attention of the others. Tanya watched with a mix of amusement and complicity, while Kate maintained an expression of surprise and confusion. For her, the scene was a disconcerting contrast. The fierce, almost relentless Nate she had met hours earlier now appeared warm, almost human. Tanya turned to her sister, seeing Kate's eyes tracking Nate's every move insistently. A playful smile curved her lips before she spoke teasingly. "I see you're calmer now, Kate." Kate barely lifted her gaze, skeptical and feigning disinterest, before returning to her book as if her sister's attention wasn't worth more effort. Tanya, far from offended, let out a soft laugh and added, still amused. "I'm glad. I thought by now you'd have let yourself go, and you and Nate would be tearing each other apart." The comment hung in the air, provoking a moment of surprise. Kate's eyes widened, clearly caught off guard. Eleazar frowned, uncomfortable with Tanya's certainty, while Laurent barely stifled a laugh behind his hand. Tanya, not fully understanding the other's reactions, raised her eyebrows and asked innocently. "What? Did I say something wrong?" Nate remained calm, as if unaffected. He gently lifted Alice from his lap, holding her securely so she wouldn't lose balance. With a kind and protective gesture, he offered to help carry the bags. Delighted, Alice took his hand, gathered all the purchases, and followed him toward the room they would share. Creation is hard, cheer me up. Jayjayempi Creators Thoughts. 17 comments 0 vote. Chapter 126. If you want to support or read some advanced chapters +10 please follow me on patreon.com/jjmp. Nate closed the bedroom door softly and let out a sigh. The weight of the bags still hung from his hands, but he quickly set them down on the bed. Alice watched him with a knowing smile as he carefully pulled out, one by one, the clothes she had bought. The pile grew rapidly, Light dresses, elegant blouses, fine coats, and perfectly chosen shoes. Alice's clothes seemed endless, each piece more colorful and stylish than the last. Among the folds of soft fabrics and faint scents still clinging to the fibers, Nate discovered a couple of bags meant for him. He raised an eyebrow curiously and began pulling out the men's clothing. There were modern cut shirts, fitted pants, dark jackets, and a couple of sweaters, nothing like what he usually wore. Nate chuckled under his breath as he held up a gray shirt that shimmered faintly under the light. This isn't exactly what I usually wear. Alice, radiant, turned toward him, her eyes sparkling. Trust me. Try them at least once, if only as an experiment. Nate shrugged with resignation. All right, at least once. With unhurried movements, he began unbuttoning his shirt and slipping off his pants, letting the clothes fall lazily over the back of a chair. Alice, with her back turned as she arranged some of her things in the closet, didn't notice right away. She was too focused on hanging the dresses on hangers, choosing the order as if it were part of some perfect ritual of order. It was then, in a careful tone, that she broke the silence. While we were shopping with the Denali, Bella sent me several messages. Nate, who was just trying on the new shirt, lifted his head slightly. A flicker of interest crossed his eyes. How is she? Alice sighed, still not looking at him. Things in Forks are tense. Charlie woke up, but he seemed a little in shock. He says he doesn't remember well what happened, though he's deeply shaken by your grandmother's death. Nate's brows furrowed. The mention of his grandmother made his skin prickle, though he said nothing. Alice went on, her voice softer now. Bella told me Charlie's been having nightmares. Some nights he wakes up screaming. Nate clenched his jaw, hardening his features. Hasn't Edward been able to read his mind and figure out how much he remembers? Alice nodded faintly, still hanging close without turning around. Not entirely. Charlie's thoughts are too muddled for him. But Edward thinks he already suspects something, that he imagines it. Still, he denies it, because it feels impossible to accept that truth. Before anything else, he wants to see Jacob, to confirm his suspicions. The name lingered in the room like an uncomfortable echo. Nate raised an eyebrow slightly, his tone edged with disinterest as he asked. And Jacob hasn't shown up. Alice slowly shook her head, her lips curved in a faintly serious line. According to Bella, no. She went to the reservation, but the Quileute boys blocked her way. Even Billy told her Jacob had mononucleosis and couldn't receive visitors for now. Silence stretched between them. Nate adjusted the new jacket over his shoulders, glancing at himself in the room's mirror. The fabric fit him surprisingly well, though he wouldn't admit it easily. Now fully dressed, Nate leaned against the wall, adjusting the sleeves of his shirt as if distracting himself with something so trivial. His eyes drifted for a moment into the void before he murmured thoughtfully. I don't know how hard the transformation process is for the Quileutes, maybe Jacob's in the same condition I was, trying to get used to his new body. Alice, hanging the last garment in its place, rested a hand against her chin. Her expression was reflective, almost grave, as she answered without taking her eyes off the closet. I'm not sure either. But Bella said she'd keep trying. What surprised me most is that she mentioned the Quileute boys speak differently of Jacob now. She said there was something like respect in their words. Nate arched an eyebrow with momentary interest. But the curiosity didn't last long. A short huff was enough to dismiss the thought. Calmly, he began unbuttoning the top half of his clothes again, removing them carefully, and reached for another bag to try on more outfits. Standing before the mirror, he commented in a low voice. I think that's for the best. The longer he stays away, the fewer chances Charlie has of confirming his suspicions. It's better if he believes it was all just a nightmare. Alice, already reaching for another pair of bags and leaning over them, let out a soft sigh before nodding slowly. Yes, I think that would be best. He'd be safer that way. Though now the problem is Bella. Nate's interest lit up immediately. Why? What's wrong with her now? Alice paused a moment, as if weighing her words carefully. Then, in a lower, almost confidential tone, she replied. Emmett slipped up about your transformation. Since then, Bella's been more insistent than ever about wanting to see you. My family's trying to convince her it's a bad idea, but the worst part is, now she's obsessed with becoming a vampire. Her argument is that I didn't wait to transform you, that you asked me and I agreed right away, or at least that's what she thinks. So she's pushing Edward harder. And from the way she told me, I have the impression she believes that if he won't change her, she might convince you instead. Nate's brows furrowed at once, a shadow of irritation darkening his face. He shook his head sharply, as if he didn't even want to consider the possibility. Meanwhile, Alice, having finally finished organizing everything neatly, turned toward him with a wide, almost triumphant smile, as if expecting praise for the meticulous order she had achieved. But she froze mid-expression. Her lips parted, suspended between pride and surprise. Before her stood Nate, shirtless, trying on more clothes with disarming ease. The light hanging from the ceiling fell across the definition of his muscles, taut and sharply carved, and the contrast with his severe expression only intensified the fierce aura that enveloped him. Alice blinked, startled, her half-smile faltering, as if the air in the room had suddenly shifted. Nate noticed at once the way Alice was looking at him, that mix of curiosity and something deeper hiding behind her bright eyes. Intrigued, he tilted his head slightly, his voice slipping out softly. What is it? Alice feigned indifference with a near theatrical gesture, as if her attention were anywhere but on him. She stepped forward with casual elegance, her tone light, though her words cut with intent. Are you against the idea of Bella becoming a vampire? She asked, still closing the distance between them, as if the question floated idly in the air. Nate seemed to pause in the current of his own thoughts. He frowned faintly, lowering his gaze for a moment before answering calmly. I'd be lying if I said I don't see the advantages. She'd be safer, and I'm intrigued by how her gift might evolve. The fact Edward can't read her mind makes me think that once she changes, she might develop a powerful ability, some kind of mental invulnerability or something similar. He paused, breathing with a trace of gravity in his eyes. But I'd also want her to enjoy her parents more, her life. She could wait until she's 22 or 23. The age difference would barely show, and with enough care, she could pass for a teenager easily. She'd still have eternity with Edward. Those 5 years would be enough time to ensure her family will be alright. A flare of anger ignited in his eyes then, like embers burning in a dark sea. Besides, there's no danger anymore, no reason to rush, it's only Riley now, and I'll deal with him as soon as I find him. Alice was already standing before him as he spoke those last words. Her expression didn't mirror Nate's tension, instead, it was distant, as if her thoughts were flowing in an entirely different direction. With the ease of someone who never asks permission, she let her hand drift slowly across his bare chest, her touch soft, almost curious, as if testing the difference between the human and the eternal. Nate arched an eyebrow, smiling at how absorbed she seemed, so caught up in something far removed from the conversation. Is it really that different from when I was human? Alice looked up immediately, smiling with the faintest hint of apology on her lips. She pulled her hand back slightly, though her eyes never left him. Sorry, I got distracted, she murmured softly, before regaining the serious tone of their talk. As for Bella, I don't think Edward will change her anytime soon. But knowing her, if he doesn't give her an answer, she'll probably end up asking you instead. So you need to be ready for that. The seriousness in her gaze was clear, though only seconds later her eyes drifted downward again, slowly tracing Nate's torso as if she found more fascination in every line of his body than in Bella's uncertain future. Nate seemed amused at how captivated she was. With calm steps, he sat on the bed, extending his hand to draw her toward him. Alice, with a mischievous smile tugging at her lips, let herself be guided naturally until she was seated on his lap. The firmness of his gesture contrasted with the softness of the moment. With a steady, almost solemn tone, Nate closed the subject of Bella. I'm not going to interfere with her choices, he declared serenely, though a shadow of concern flickered in his eyes. I'm certain she'll end up a vampire, but it won't be because of me. Not because I don't want to help her, but because I can't even trust myself to be in the same room without killing her. Alice listened in silence, nodding gently. Her slender fingers brushed aside a stray lock of hair falling over his face, the intimate gesture tender as she remained seated across his lap. Nate smiled faintly at the warmth of the touch, and after a brief clearing of his throat, he shifted the tone of the conversation to something lighter. So tell me, he murmured playfully, his eyes gleaming as he looked at her, what is it you keep seeing in me that has you so distracted? She let out a short, musical laugh that softened the moment's tension. The truth is, I must admit you have a gallant yet wild air about you, she answered teasingly, her eyes flashing with complicity. I wasn't the only one to notice it today. While we were shopping, the Denali wouldn't stop asking about you. Tanya in particular congratulated me for having such an attractive partner. Nate laughed softly, one eyebrow raised in mild disbelief, but Alice wasn't finished. Lowering her voice as if confessing a forbidden secret, she leaned close to his ear, her nearness crackling with electricity. In fact, Tanya's always had a weakness for handsome, mysterious men. That's why her last interest was Edward, but I hope, for your sake, you don't get any ideas about her. He let out another laugh, short and deep, as if the thought itself were absurd. His eyes traveled slowly over Alice's figure on his lap, from head to toe, with a look both delicate and intent, charged with meaning. The intensity of his gaze made Alice drop her guard for a moment. She rested a hand against his chest, caressing him softly, as if unconsciously answering his intentions. The tension between them thickened in silence, almost tangible. Nate's hand slid firmly along Alice's leg, tracing her contour slowly until it reached beneath her dress. The touch made her shiver lightly, a mix of surprise and anticipation coursing through her. In a low, almost alarmed whisper, Alice tried to hold him back. Are you sure? There are plenty of vampires here, they'll definitely hear us. Nate ignored the warning. His decision burned in the glint of his eyes. With a firm movement, he leaned in toward her, and without giving her the chance to resist, stole a kiss blazing with fire, deep and consuming, as if the world around them no longer mattered. 10 comments 0 vote. Chapter 127. If you want to support or read some advanced chapters +10, please follow me on patreon.com/jayjayempi. R18 alert. They kissed with an intensity that made them forget everything else. Nate's lips were firm, demanding, and when he parted them to slide his tongue inside, Alice responded without hesitation, tangling hers with his in a fiery game filled with restrained hunger. Their tongues searched and explored, brushing and teasing, while their hands roamed every inch of each other's bodies, desperate for contact. Nate's hands slid down the length of Alice's legs until they reached beneath her dress. With an almost instinctive motion, he toyed lightly with the elastic of her underwear, provoking an involuntary shiver from her. Alice broke the kiss for a moment, resting her forehead against Nate's, panting with a nearly imperceptible breath. She didn't need air, but feeling Nate so fierce and determined thrilled her in an inevitable way. Since he had turned, he had always been tender with her, but now he showed a wilder side, and that made her tremble. With a graceful motion, Alice shifted and swung her leg over him, straddling him as he sat on the edge of the bed. The movement let her feel the firmness of her partner, the pressure of his body, and the intensity of his desire. Nate gazed at her with his burning, hungry red eyes. Alice couldn't help feeling a little nervous. Before, when they had been together while he was still human, she had to hold back too much. Now, with both transformed, she felt as though their roles had been reversed. Urgently, Nate slid his hands along her back, pulling her closer. Alice let herself be guided, lost in the lust they shared. Nate moved his lips from hers to her cheek, leaving a trail of damp kisses before slowly descending to her neck, planting soft kisses that resonated through the room. Alice closed her eyes, burying both hands in Nate's hair, pulling gently at the soft strands while a low, constant moan escaped her lips, fueling her partner's intensity. Giving into desire, Alice dragged her hands down Nate's back, scratching hard. Her marks, though fierce, barely left faint traces on his skin. Feeling her intensity, Nate bit into her neck with passion, hard enough for her to feel it, but without hurting her. Alice let out a small cry, surprised, but with renewed lust. She pushed his bare torso, forcing him against the bed. The bed frame creaked loudly under the impact, but Nate wasn't surprised. Alice gave him a mischievous smile before crashing back into his mouth. Nate wasted no time. With a swift motion, he flipped her beneath him, pinning her down, holding both her arms above her head with one hand. Alice was startled to realize she couldn't move, but the sensation only excited her further. With his free hand, Nate traced every curve of Alice's body over her dress, feeling the firmness of her thighs. His hand slid upward slowly, brushing teasingly at her entrance with a brief movement that made Alice bite her lip in anticipation. His touch continued past her stomach and up to her breasts. With his finger, sharp as a claw, he undid the buttons of her neckline one by one, exposing her bra. He then continued to her face, running his thumb over her lips. Alice, restrained and glowing from stimulation, parted her mouth just slightly and let his thumb slip inside, sucking lightly before Nate withdrew it with tenderness, leaving soft kisses on its tip, nearly lost in the ecstasy of the foreplay. Alice looked at Nate with pleading eyes. He, unwilling to make her wait, slid that same hand down to her thighs, slipping beneath her dress. With slow, deliberate movements, he explored between her underwear, teasing her folds and coaxing small, muffled moans as Alice writhed faintly. Spreading her legs wider, Nate began to slide his fingers inside her one by one, setting a steady, growing rhythm that drove Alice to move her hips in sync with his hand, surrendering completely to the shared sensation. Nate watched her, drinking in the way she gave herself over to the experience, while the arousal beneath his pants grew impossible to hide. Alice, still moaning, turned her head to look at him, noticing the bulge straining against his clothes, filling her with anticipation. With one knee braced on the bed, Nate released her arms and explored more freely, caressing her breasts while his other hand continued to work her, feeling the intense connection between them. Still twisting from pleasure, Alice, now freed, let her hands rush down to Nate's pants. Her fingers found his belt, and with a decisive tug, she tore it apart, releasing some of the tension. She looked into Nate's eyes between ragged breaths and muffled moans, her expression pleading, almost begging. Nate stared back, his breathing labored, eyes gleaming as he caught every signal of her desperation. With a swift, firm gesture, he ripped away the rest of his pants, lost in the fiery bond uniting them. His hands didn't stop, they roamed Alice's dress, and with one fierce pull, he tore it away, leaving her chest bare. Alice, with a nearly frantic impulse, ripped off her own bra, while Nate shredded his own underwear in his urgency to feel her. The air in the room thickened with gasps and ragged breaths. With Nate completely naked and Alice only in panties, she clung to him tightly, holding him as if they were one, their lips meeting in kisses charged with urgency and restrained desire. Every movement was intense, every contact electrifying, and both lost themselves in the sensation, forgetting the world around them. Alice wrapped her legs around Nate's hips, moving quickly, and he, following her rhythm, tore at the waistband of her underwear, yanking it aside. Their bodies joined in a single thrust, as if every curve and muscle had been designed to fit perfectly together. Alice let out a cry of surprise and pleasure as Nate finally entered her, her hands digging deeper into his back, leaving temporary marks of her desire. Their synchronization was total, ragged breaths, moans mixing together, and hands exploring in a fervor that seemed endless. Nate held her firmly as she surrendered completely to the intensity of the moment, each motion fusing need and desire in one shared instant. Inside her, their bodies moved with perfect rhythm, each thrust and brush filling the room with the sharp sounds of flesh colliding. Alice's moans blended with Nate's labored breaths, both voices broken by the force and speed of their movements. Feeling her complete surrender, Nate began to quicken his pace, letting passion consume them without restraint. The bed groaned beneath them, the frame straining to hold as each impact grew stronger. Clinging to Nate, Alice pressed her head to his shoulder, eyes squeezed shut, overwhelmed by the intensity. Her breath came fast and shallow, lips parting only to let out soft moans that stoked her partner's voracity. When the climax neared, she moved with more abandon, following Nate's pace and answering each thrust with her own. Nate, attuned to every reaction, bit hard into her shoulder, leaving faint cracks on her soft skin. Alice cried out, locking her legs tightly around him and giving herself over completely, reaching her climax in shuddering waves that united body and mind in overwhelming passion. With her still trembling from release, Nate, still hungry, gripped her legs and lifted her forcefully, the sudden motion stirring the air around them. In a single surge, he pinned her against the wall. The wood groaned and thundered under the impact, resonating through the room. The press of Nate's body against hers made her shudder instantly, and, giving in, he continued to thrust with unstoppable force. Each crash shook the wall like a tremor, and the room pulsed with the rhythm of their bodies. Alice, utterly overcome, could only claw at the wall, feeling every grain of wood against her skin as she struggled to stay upright, matching Nate's frantic pace. Their ragged breaths filled the air, their closeness intensifying every movement. Nate, feeling release close, squeezed her legs tighter and, with wild abandon, drove himself harder, building to a near unbearable peak. Alice's legs trembled, barely holding, when Nate's climax tore from him in a guttural groan. She could hardly react, feeling every surge inside her, her body arching with each sensation. Nate let himself be carried by orgasm for a brief moment, reveling in its intensity. But Alice, refusing to yield, shoved Nate with surprising force, separating him and sending him stumbling to his feet, breathing harshly, eyes blazing with desire. Stunned by her audacity, Nate began to approach slowly. Alice, with a playful, defiant smile, turned her back on him, pressing her hands firmly against the wall. Urgently, Nate pressed his body to hers, muscles taut beneath his skin, entering her again, gripping her hips tightly as he continued his frenzied thrusts. Each movement was a clash of bodies, a rhythm that made the wall and floor shake beneath them. Alice's cries filled the room, mixing with Nate's deep growls, their movements, grips, and intensity transforming every instant into a wild game of strength and desire. Alice, her face pressed to the wall, felt each thrust drive her deeper. Nate, with both hands on her hips, slid one up to her shoulder, reinforcing his grip and increasing his speed. Alice felt as though she was being split in two, her fingers piercing through the wall itself as she reached climax again. Nate, still holding her, pulled her down, this time onto the floor, where they continued for hours, the house barely withstanding each crash of flesh and Alice's shouted moans. Dot 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 comma dot 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 dot. R18END. Neither of them knew exactly how much time had passed. The world seemed reduced only to the sensation of their entwined bodies, the frantic rhythm that bound them, and the shuddering orgasms that racked them. Alice, still panting with parted lips, reached her climax once more. The glow in her eyes was pure surrender, though her mind had only just begun to register something strange. Nate, still above her, suddenly felt a searing burn in his throat. It was as if the very air had turned into liquid fire, scorching him from within. The pleasure vanished at once, replaced by a raw, savage hunger impossible to control. Alice blinked, her gaze still blurred with pleasure, until she noticed the tension in Nate's face. She placed a trembling hand on his cheek, trying to draw him toward her. "What's wrong?" she murmured in a broken voice. But he didn't answer. His eyes, darkened to a fierce, bloody shade, barely managed to focus on her before he pulled away abruptly. With an almost feral motion, he rose from the floor and lunged toward the backpack Alice had left in the corner. His hands moved clumsily, desperately, until he found the blood bags. The sound of tearing plastic filled the room, followed by the unsettling rush of red liquid sliding down his throat with ravenous greed. Alice sat up slowly, wrapping her naked body in the torn sheet. A burning itch began to climb in her own throat, forcing her to hold her breath, not to give in to instinct. She watched silently, still calming from all they had shared, as Nate drank bag after bag, until at last the final empty wrapper fell at his feet. The silence that followed was suffocating. Nate panted heavily, his hands stained, his chest rising and falling unevenly. His throat felt satisfied, yet he couldn't ignore the brutality of the urge that had consumed him. Almost automatically, he wiped his mouth with a scrap of his shredded pants on the floor. He collapsed onto the broken bed, his eyes distant, his mind caught between relief and guilt. Alice, moving softly, approached and sat beside him. Wrapped in the sheet, her silhouette seemed fragile, almost ethereal, but the tenderness in her gestures carried unyielding strength. She leaned into him, resting her head gently against his bare chest. Nate exhaled slowly, as though that warmth dispelled the shadows haunting him. His arms wrapped around her instinctively, pulling her closer with a need deeper than any physical desire. They stayed like that, lying amidst the ruins of the bed, clinging to each other as though that closeness were the only refuge against hunger, guilt, and uncertainty. Creation is hard, cheer me up. Jayjayempi Creators Thoughts. 12 comments 0 vote. Chapter 128. If you want to support or read some advanced chapters +10, please follow me on patreon.com/jjmp. They stayed lying on the bed for several minutes, wrapped in a warm silence, almost heavy with a mix of guilt and satisfaction. Nate stared at the ceiling, his eyes fixed on an indefinite point, as if processing every recent sensation. In a thread of a voice, almost a whisper, he murmured, "Things really are different when you're a vampire." Alice laughed softly, a light and playful sound that filled the room with a silent complicity. "Yeah, you definitely got wilder," she commented, her voice teasing yet with a glint of admiration in her eyes. Nate lowered his gaze to look into her eyes in disbelief, a light smile playing on his lips as he enjoyed the moment's ease, but his expression quickly turned more serious. "I meant the thirst," he said, his voice deep and tense. "Every time it comes back, I feel like I lose my mind, move on autopilot, and lose control. I don't know if I'll be ready to interact with humans soon." Alice watched him with a flash of concern and then pressed her head against his chest, letting her hair brush his torso as her fingers traced absent-minded circles on his shoulder. Her touch was soft, comforting, a caress that seemed to anchor him. "You'll see that you can," she murmured. "We've all been in the same situation before. It's never completely easy, but over time it gets easier." Nate held the embrace a little tighter, feeling gratitude and relief from her words. Then, his gaze wandered around the room. The scene was chaotic. Bookshelves had toppled, books scattered across the floor, the walls bore deep scratches telling the story of their movements. Force. The bed they were still resting on was broken, partially stuck to the floor, unable to support itself in its original form. A small humor crept into him, prompting a light laugh. Looks like we've been fighting, he commented, raising an eyebrow with amusement. Alice followed the joke with a mischievous smile. If that's the case, then I admit you won me. They both laughed, letting the lightness of the moment ease the tension still lingering in the room. Nate turned toward one of the windows, noticing the sunlight filtering in, bathing the room with a warm glow that contrasted with the mess filling the space. Looks like it's already daytime, he said, his voice more relaxed. Alice stood, stretching her back elegantly as her fingers brushed over the remnants of the dress and scattered garments. Best we see about fixing this room, she said, her voice firm yet still tinged with amusement. Besides, I need to feed soon, too. Nate rose in a single swift motion, surveying the disaster with critical eyes. Yeah, seems like the best idea for now, he said, but before moving, he noticed the empty blood bags in a corner, and a dangerous thought crossed his mind. He took a deep breath and, with a thread of concern, voiced what troubled him. We fed before coming to the Denali house, barely a day has passed, and the thirst is back. Could it be that I need more blood than usual? The thought made him shudder, and his gaze darkened for a moment as he measured every sensation coursing through his body. Alice pondered for a few seconds before responding, looking at him intently while weighing the possibilities. I don't think so, I fed just a few minutes after you, and I'm thirsty too. It's strange, but it doesn't seem out of the ordinary, she said, offering a reassuring smile. Trying to distract herself, Alice reached for her phone to check the time, but when she approached the shelf where she had left it, she noticed it was dead. She plugged it into a charger, and while waiting for it to respond, they began tidying the room. Their movements were fast and coordinated. Nate picked up books, Alice arranged the sheets, and with every gesture their hands brushed casually, sparking silent closeness. The atmosphere became very comfortable. Though they were still naked and occasionally exchanged glances with double meanings, they were aware that if they got lost in lust again, Alice's thirst would only intensify. Nate started picking up the clothes he would wear, but felt it was a bad idea to change like this, without more. Though there was no sweat, he felt they needed to clean up. Luckily, the room had its own bathroom. Upon entering, Nate noticed curiously that there was only one shower. Curious, he murmured, analyzing the space. But in a house built for vampires, it doesn't surprise me. There's probably a full bathroom somewhere else to avoid suspicion. Nate gestured for Alice to come closer, and soon they decided to shower together. Nate held Alice by the waist as she moved under the stream of water, making sure the water didn't bother her and allowing her space to lather. Their hands constantly met. He brushed wet strands of hair from her face. She clung to his arm, hugging him slightly from behind. Between laughter and small jokes, the shower became a moment of intimacy and comfort, where physical contact and closeness spoke louder than any words. Watching her, Nate thought that if his eternity would always be like this, with moments of closeness, laughter, and complicity, then he had no regrets about becoming a vampire. The thought brought a sense of relief and acceptance he had never felt before, and his gaze softened as it swept over her, smiling under the water. When they finished, Nate lifted her in his arms and carried her out of the bathroom, placing her carefully on a chair that had luckily survived the previous night. With Alice seated, Nate passed the towel over her wet hair, making sure each strand was free of drops. Alice leaned against him, closing her eyes and enjoying his gesture and the softness of his hands. Then Nate quickly dried himself, and they began dressing, both happy with the closeness they shared. When they were ready to head to the rest of the house, Alice looked a bit self-conscious, certain the other occupants had heard everything from outside. Nate shrugged naturally. The Denalis seem pretty liberal in that regard. Basically, there are two couples here, so it shouldn't be anything new. At most, we'll have to apologize for the mess in the room. Alice nodded, though not entirely convinced, remembering how in her family, when Emmett and Rosalie went on their honeymoon every few years, they always made the effort to find a separate place so as not to inconvenience the rest of the family. When they finally left the room, they noticed the house was empty. The lights were still on, some things were left running, and a book Kate had been reading lay on the sofa as if someone had left in a hurry. Nate's expression hardened, something in the atmosphere told him the absence wasn't casual. Cautiously, he began sniffing the air, looking for a trace. The Denali's scent was strong yet absent, as if they had been out of the house for some time. Concerned, Nate went outside with Alice following closely. She also seemed uneasy, slightly nervous, aware that something might have happened during the hours they had been distracted. Nate continued sniffing until he caught a fresher trail. Without wasting time, they began following it, venturing into the nearby forest. As they advanced, they noticed a small wisp of smoke rising among the trees, small and concentrated, more like a campfire than a wildfire. When they arrived, they found the Denalis gathered around the fire, the couples embracing, laughing, and sharing stories. Tanya was the first to notice their arrival. With an amused smile, she exclaimed, "Finally done. We thought you'd take the whole week." Laurent chuckled a bit and, in a teasing tone, said to Irina, "Looks like I won the bet." Irina, amused, responded almost defensively, "It had been a while since I was around a neophyte. I thought they could last longer without feeding." Laurent raised his chin triumphantly. "Only, vegetarian, vampires have that habit of feeding every 1 or 2 weeks. Normal vampires feed more often, simply because of the craving for blood." Alice, confused, furrowed her brow and asked, "What exactly do you mean?" Kate, without taking her eyes off the fire, replied indifferently, "We bet among ourselves how long it would take before you'd have to stop to feed." Apparently, Laurent won. He was the only one who said you couldn't go more than 5 days without blood. Nate's eyes widened in surprise, but his voice remained serious. "We were in the room for 5 days. Tanya laughed, noticing his expression. "Yes, for a moment we thought you were hurting her. Almost came in to reinforce," she said playfully, without any real intent to be serious, "but in the end, we decided to give you some space. We've been here, in the forest, for 5 days. Alice brought a hand to her forehead and lowered her gaze, closing her eyes while shaking her head slightly. Though she couldn't blush, she felt embarrassment rise to her head. Her breathing became light and evasive, and in a tone trying to seem unconcerned, she commented that it would be best to feed and that she would return in a few hours. Carmen, who was embraced by Eleazar, got up with a soft, playful laugh. Her body moved gracefully as she announced she would accompany her, as she was thirsty as well. With a quick blink, they ventured further into the forest, disappearing among the trunks and vegetation that let beams of light filter through the leaves. The rest of the group remained silent, watching them vanish into the tree shadows. The group's eyes turned to Nate. He hesitated, each movement and decision measured as he evaluated what to do next. Tanya, noticing his gaze following the path Alice and Carmen had taken, tilted her head slightly and asked, "Have you fed yet?" Nate nodded, his face serious, taking a deep breath as his gaze swept over everyone in the group. Tanya turned to the others and received a slight nod of approval from each, confirming that the plan was ready. She then looked back at Nate, this time with a more serious expression, though still full of calm and determination. "You know," she began in a calm voice, "we've been talking. You seem calmer when Alice is around. Maybe we should take advantage of the fact that you're sated and she isn't to test your control. I think if we all go with you, at least within the forest limits, near the nearest town, we could get an idea of how well you can stay in control." Nate frowned, his mind filled with doubt and fear. His voice was barely a whisper, laced with mistrust. "I don't know, honestly, I don't think it's a good idea." Tanya stepped a little closer, her presence firm and reassuring. Her gaze sought Nate's, trying to convey security while speaking quickly but without pressure. "Relax. No one expects you to have perfect control. But it's a good opportunity. We'll all hold you, and Kate will incapacitate you if anything happens. Also, we won't enter the town, we'll just let you sense the scent of a human nearby." Nate still seemed unsure, a slight tremor running through his shoulders as he murmured to himself, "I honestly don't think they could stop me if I lose control." Kate, hearing those words, immediately stood, her body straight, her expression hardened with determination. Her voice cut through the air firmly. "Don't be foolish. This isn't a fight. I'll have a hand on the back of your neck at all times. The moment you lose control, I'll incapacitate you, and together we'll move you away in a blink." Nate took a deep breath, feeling the tension in his shoulders begin to ease slightly. He looked at the faces around him, firm, attentive, and ready to help without hesitation. The certainty that he wasn't alone gave him an odd sense of relief, though the unease about what could happen remained. The sunlight filtering through the trees cast long shadows on the forest floor, and the air smelled of wet leaves and freshly turned soil. Nate focused on that scent, on the security of his group, and slowly began to yield to the possibility of trusting this group of people.